Hello, and welcome to a podcast. However, this podcast is going to be done with a video accompaniment of me searching for, what are they called? Morel mushrooms. And so, welcome along. I will be the voice, and this will be your view. Hopefully of lots of mushrooms, but the fewer mushrooms we find, the more countryside we'll cover. So it's a win-win. We've been doing really good this year. Really doing, I don't know. We're getting a lot of mushrooms. I don't know whether that's well or good. So I wanted to talk about the idea that is in my head, and I don't love technology for its own sake, right? I think I can say that honestly. I'm learning to use more of it, and as a tool, there are things that you want to get done, and that is sometimes the technology is the best way to get it done. I want to guard myself against ever falling in love with the tool, because I think that clouds your use of the tool. You have the tool you want to use, and then you make up a task to fit it. I think a lot of people, that's the Facebook phenomena. They want to be on Facebook, and then they tell themselves, well, sharing all of these events in our life is a real good reason to be on Facebook. And it may be that you don't necessarily want to share all of those events. And then secondly, it may be that you find yourself sharing those events with only the kind of people who are on Facebook. And then that becomes its own issue. So the tool defined the task, and it turns out you never sent pictures to Grandpa because Grandpa doesn't get on Facebook. Oops, I didn't point to that one. Because the task wasn't to communicate with your family. The task became the need to communicate. Oh man, the mites are flying around your head now. I should have brought something to drive them off. So anyway, I'm trying not to fall in love with the tool. I'm trying to have the task. But I will tell you one thing I really like about this format for podcasting is I'm out here thinking through my day, and I really believe that thinking through something and talking it through are on the same spectrum. I think that articulation is a form of thinking. It's a multidisciplined form of thinking. So I can have these thoughts in my brain. And I think that maybe some people who are artists, deeply artists, can picture. They can think in pictures. I don't. I think in words. And sometimes I think I have enough trait openness that sometimes I think, I lost one here. Where is it? I'll go here and get this one and then change my perspective and see if I can catch the one I missed. Huh. Okay, well that one gets left for whatever eats them. But there are some more. So anyway, I do think that there's some utility in thinking in terms of maps. Most of my thinking happens with words. And thanks to this little phone that I carry with me, I am not a crazy guy wandering through the woods, mumbling to himself. I am a podcaster. So that's why I like technology. Here's what I was thinking about when I decided to turn on sorry about that noise, that's my plastic bucket. Here's what I was thinking about when I got to finally the place where it's like, I'm just going to turn on the podcasting. I was thinking about awkward. It seems like I've been hearing it more often now. So I would say it amounts to something like a trend to describe things as awkward. Maybe social awkwardness has increased or whatever. But I had a socially awkward experience last night that I want to analyze, particularly because it is sort of like a no-fault socially awkward experience. I think it's very seldom that you have someone who uses awkward as a defense. I think it's possible. I think sometimes people, no, I know that this happens. It's a form of, I would say, bullying, as a very specific definition. Bullying is finding yourself in a socially defined group where people don't play by the same rules. So you don't have to contend honestly, you can contend dishonestly. And so I know that some people who can stand for things to be socially awkward can use that to leverage. One guy was interesting because he very, very much hated the saying Minnesota nice. And I don't know whether Minnesota nice is a thing. I think it is. I remember during the toilet paper phase of the pandemic, maybe you remember that phase, people were buying up all the toilet paper that they could. But I encountered, I think more than once, a situation where Walmart, which is like not someplace that's driven by a lot of social mores, but it was in Minnesota, and there on the shelf, all of the toilet paper was gone except for one package. And to me, it seemed kind of clear that there was something strong in people that said, hey, don't be, stock up, but don't take the last one, because out there's someone who needs it more than I need it. And I don't want to be depriving them of enough toilet paper. I'm responsible enough to want to stock up, but I'm not mean enough to want to have the last one at the cost of you. And I would say that's not a bad definition of what we might be talking about if we say Minnesota nice. But this guy hated that saying. And I always wondered about that until I was on a project with him and realized that one of the ways that he would gain an advantage was by his tolerance for awkwardness was higher than most people's. And so he would make you, he would basically say, if you won't say it to my face, then you are not entitled to that opinion. And in terms of policy, that worked well, is that people would try to say something nicely, and you can't say it nicely as clear as you could say it harshly. And so he would count on that, and he could always get you to, he seemed to be consistently able, which would incentivize the behavior, to use that awkwardness as leverage, his tolerance for awkwardness as leverage. Okay, so that's one possibility. I think there's a possibility that people can find awkwardness as a useful tool to isolate themselves. And that, I don't know. That might be a pathology from start to finish, right? Because so much of unhealthy mental illness is I don't know if it's caused, but it certainly is increased by isolation. Okay, so somebody learns that if they allow themselves to be, and here's what I think what awkwardness is at the social level, is that your reaction doesn't match the map. And oops, there's a bug for breakfast. Your social awkwardness doesn't match. I mean, the social map you made. Now, we don't like people to perfectly match the map, but we like it to not match the map in some meaningful way, which means that we would find ourselves and we'd say, that's an unusual reaction. And then within a few minutes, we'd say, oh, but here's why. That is in stories and whatever. That's this unexpectedness you want to have. It's like, oh, that's unusual. Oh, I get it. Okay, so, but people, so that's the ideal amount of mismatched mapping of social interaction. But what happens is that if you are, and I think it's particularly for people who are high in neuroticism and low in extroversion, they find out that first of all, the danger of mismapping your social environment seems to them more dangerous. So I missed it. I totally missed the social cues. And so I need to protect myself by avoiding them. And then they find that a self-fulfilling prophecy because they can avoid social, their awkward behavior means that people leave them alone. And then that's not something they're missing because they aren't high in extroversion, and it's safer. Okay, and so they allow themselves, the awkwardness is inadvertently, how do I say this? The awkwardness is inadvertently, rewarded. And then it becomes a cycle unto itself. There's a nice little pond. I'm going to circle this one. I think I might have been around it, but we're still finding them. So, well, that brings me to the situation last night. And if the person who hears this recognizes themselves, I don't think there's any problem because it really was not. So social awkwardness appeared in a situation where the person I know, and I am absolutely confident the last thing that he wants to do is to isolate. He loves talking. He doesn't want to isolate himself. So what happened was my wife and I started out with some taking a risk of being socially awkward. We showed up, but we had a sort of, someone had told us where they were going to be. They were camping. And so, you don't tell someone, hey, we're at your lake camping, and then be mad at them for showing up. So it was low level. socially awkward. And then we pop in, and we had, they were fascinated by the mushrooms. And so we showed them our mushrooms and gave them some, and that was good. And then the gentleman began the process of offering us a seat and getting out some chairs that he had. And then between dogs and kids, he got distracted. Okay, so we were standing there, and he had gotten out some chairs, but not enough for us. He was about to say, hey, why don't you sit down? And yet he sort of got distracted. So we're left there standing, sort of like about to be invited to take a seat, only we aren't. And, okay. Now, that was sort of like you could see how it got mismapped. We mapped the expectation, and that did not happen. And so, what can we do? Well, if you are high in neuroticism, you're like, uh-oh, things aren't matching the map. We have a problem. Problems can result in little problems can spin into big problems. What we need to do is get out of here because of the chaos. But because I am high in extroversion and low in neuroticism, I remembered, not consciously, but we're sort of putting a archetypal frame back onto this. I realized that what I had was a dragon standing in the way, a dragon of chaos standing in the way of my map. And that dragon of chaos standing in the way of my map was a good reason to turn around. But there was another reason to go forward. And the reason to go forward was that I considered having a talk with someone, a treasure, and dragons guard treasures. And so if you're set up to look at the possible treasure more than you look at the possible danger, and you cannot, I could say, well, you could do the analysis, but that would be unfair because I didn't do the analysis. That's just there for me. And so I went over and said, I think I'd like to sit on this. And I picked up a stool, I set it up, offered one, and then immediately he remembered that that's what he was doing and offered one to my wife. And my wife and I sat down and enjoyed a very fun talk. We got to know them better, and we connected with some family that was there with them, and I thought that was a good connection. All positive after we faced the dragon of awkwardness. And I think that is something that is forgotten in our society. Man, these bugs are getting to the point where I may be running from them. They started out very few. Now I just got a cloud. Let me see. And I don't have the right kind of hat. Normally, sometimes if I have, once you get to the fall or to late summer, you do not want a hat that has an adjustable baseball cap, because the flies track on that hole and they dive in there and simply go and get you. But in the early part of the year, if I had worn a hat with that little hole, what I could do is I could take a branch, and these flies will hover about the highest point, And so what you do is you just make the highest point something else. And that is not open to me. I guess I could stick something down my collar, but I think I don't like it that much. So they may actually chase me off the mushroom path, but this is so fun. This many mushrooms is not the norm for me. So anyway, what's happened is it archetypally is that there was a dragon of chaos because the social map that was laid out by my past and by the actions of my host suddenly got disrupted, and I was mapless. Okay, and the map wasn't satisfyingly mapless. It was like it got, I don't know whether to go right or left, because the danger I'm going to lose the mushroom on the other side. So I didn't know whether I was going, what was going. It wasn't the slight mismapping that resolves itself in a few minutes, and you're like, oh yes, the map is not the terrain. That's a satisfying thing. I expected this, but something else happened. This was more chaos than fit into that pattern. And that mismapping then was what caused me, probably, I don't think that I was unaware of it. I don't think that somebody who is low in neuroticism is somebody who fundamentally can't determine dangerous situations. But I think there's somebody who can say, that's a low level of danger. I get it. This is a mismap. But I also had a vision for the treasure. And since I had a vision for the treasure, I was willing to put up with that. So then, but if I were high in neuroticism, I guarantee I know something like what would be going through someone's head is they would be about to be offered a seat to have fellowship, and the person would withhold the seat, and it would be easy for me to see that that's because the dog took off and they had to address that, and then the kids came back and asked them a question and they got distracted. But the person who's high in neuroticism says, maybe I'm the one who was mismapped. Maybe I have bad breath. Maybe I have body odor. Maybe once they got close to me, they realized that their plan to invite me to sit was no longer a good plan. I probably am their dragon, and I have to prove that I'm not. So I will remove myself. That's typical thinking for someone who is neurotic. And so I don't know, but here's the routine that I think needs to be built in. And I say this, and I'm not the person to say this because I do it naturally, but I've put this down in podcasts before. The people who are talented in something show you how to get the best advantage. Okay? So if someone saw me, they would say, hey, I'm not going to use Jeremy as an example of how it's going to be for me. Because it's a lot harder for me to ignore that fear that maybe I have body odor, and maybe they withdrew their offer of a chair because they decided they don't want to be around me. Jeremy could do that without even thinking. That's easy for him. It's like him being a 6'8" basketball player and dunking the ball. Okay, but I can use Jeremy as this guy who has this talent to reveal to me that there is a treasure there that I would have missed. So I don't need to, I don't compare myself with him to saying, well, how should I approach this? I'm going to have to overcome things that he never even imagined to say, hey, let me sit down on this chair now that that's a huge thing. That's a skill that someone who is neurotic will have to gain. And fair enough. That is the nature of a skill. But what I am, you're going to have to work at it. But I will submit that it is the person who is talented, who through no fault of their own is able to ignore those things and get the treasure that alerts you to the fact that you would be missing a treasure if you followed only what was easy. Okay? And that is, sorry, I got to swing. I hope you don't get seasick watching me because I'm using my camera hand to get branches out of the way. Okay, so man, you can't, they're just far enough that kneeling is a problem. And standing up is worse. Ow, my head is stuck in a thicket. All right. This is just an incredible patch. Okay, so that is, you look at me and you don't say, well, it should be like that for me. It won't be like that for you. But you do look at me and say, there was a treasure that I would have missed because I did not train myself to properly assess the dragon. So I'm not saying there wasn't awkwardness. I'm saying that the question that you need to ask and the training, I would say, the skill that you need to train is to define awkwardness. And that's my point today. Awkward by its very construction is not dangerous. So if you call something awkward, you're walking down the street and somebody pulls out a knife, you don't say, oh, that was awkward. You say, that was dangerous. And then properly you say, I'm going to run from this. And yes, it didn't meet the mapping, but it didn't meet the mapping on a dimension that was dangerous. So no, you don't look at that and say, oh, that's awkward. You say that mismapping of the social environment is dangerous. Now, I don't know if I've told on a podcast the story of my one gang fight, but I once was carrying a harmonica in a pocket that somebody thought was a flick knife. Okay, so that's a situation where you would say, oh, that was awkward. I'm not a threat, I'm a harmonica player. But that mismatch didn't involve danger. So my point is that we are already having, we already make that distinction. Our very word awkward takes that into account. So my challenge to somebody is start paying attention to awkward. You already know what awkward is. Awkward is a very specific mismapping of the social environment which has a treasure or has potential of a treasure. So awkward, if you automatically, and this is always, awkward gives you two choices. One is to run away. The other is to push on. And I would say that awkward, by its definition, even in our accepted definition, so this isn't my optimistic extrovert definition. This is the definition that is already pretty much accepted. The definition of awkward is something that is not dangerous. And as such, the decision in that awkwardness has already been made for you. There's not certainty of treasure, right? But because it's not dangerous, as determined by the fact that you use the term awkward, ducking under, the awkward is, I think, pretty strong evidence that you could look at it and say, aha, I've already put it into. It doesn't map socially normal. Fair enough. This is not normal. This is a mismatch, but it is a specific category of mismatch where I can afford to go forward because the cost of pulling back means that I forego any claim to the treasure. And by the definition awkward, I can be pretty confident that I've already mapped it. My emotions map things quickly. Emotions are very useful in quickly determining a choice. So the point is, if you feel awkward, and this probably gets into hemispheres, you have already mapped this as a danger-free mismatch of your social map. Which means that you don't have much of a dragon to overcome. And you have a high likelihood that if you overcome the dragon of awkwardness 2 or 3 times, I'm not guaranteeing that every time there's a treasure waiting for you, but I am suggesting that it's very likely that you will find treasure more often than not. So I am not suggesting that you create a new category and try to convince yourself. I'm suggesting that most people already have this category of awkward, but they have, and it has similarities to danger. Okay, awkwardness and danger are both mismaps of the social cues. Thought I saw one. Yep, there it is. So in that they're similar. But the thing is that you have already, your emotions, probably the right side of your brain has already mapped out that this mismap is an unpredictable mismatch. It is not a dangerous mismatch, which is the concept of awkward. Awkwardness, now, if you have been raised to in an environment that says all discomfort has to be gotten rid of, and this happens a lot, as parents accept as a mandate that if you love your child, they will never be uncomfortable, then you have made, first of all, you haven't trained someone to face awkwardness. And that's disappointing, because then awkwardness steals the treasure from you. But the reason why you think awkwardness is danger may be because somebody has said, if people love you, they make sure that you are never uncomfortable. That is the true mark of love. And I would say there are plenty of misguided parents who have done that. Now, they've done it for a reason that has the most, I would say, to do with our prosperity. I realize that in my kids' life. early. And I was on the United States military wage, not particularly high. I was working as a sergeant. I did not have a lot of money, and I already realized that I have enough money that I can insulate my kids from even, basically, I can insulate my kids from the dopamine that comes from having things that they want, that they have to wait for. And so what happens then is if you start out, kids start out with pretty low-level wants. And if every one of those low-level wants is immediately met, then what happens in that kid is they wanted it, they mapped the approach, they got it. So they're existing on an end of the spectrum where there's very little dopamine. But people want dopamine. So if the kid says, I want that toy, and you say, well, we'll wait until we are finished shopping, and if you've been good, we'll get you the toy. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's great. And I would say, well, maybe that is. However, they had, there's some pollen in the air. They had the situation of not having a very long experience with dopamine, just enough to know they wanted more. So what will they do? Well, they will set their sights higher. And so it doesn't take very much money before you convince your kids that the way to get dopamine, which is what they crave more than they crave the stupid toy that they just saw that they've never wanted before, the way you teach your kids to constantly be lifting the horizon as a mechanism to get more dopamine is something you taught them. Okay? And we're all in that. It's so easy for us to build that into our kids. You have to actively fight that. It's not like you can just, and the reason you have to actively fight it is because, I mean, the longest, I'm convinced that for humans, the most satisfying dopaministic, serotonistic connection is the pursuit of food. And I mean, this is a good place to bring it to because I'm out pursuing food and I really get amped up. But I think that that's because that circle is very, very deep. When you are out pursuing food and when you don't find it, you don't get to eat. And when you find it, you get to eat after perhaps a long period of hunger. I can really believe that would be a very satisfying dopamine circuit, and But if you don't have that, and we don't, then you end up teaching your kids to constantly raise their desire, to demand something more difficult, in hopes that they will get that same dopamine burst that has been denied to them by our prosperity, which then circles into a very problematic game that parents get caught in. So the parents are caught in this game of providing that for their kids. And the measure of love, like I suggested, becomes, how do I raise a kid who never has discomfort? And then you set for yourself an impossible bar, because without discomfort, the kid doesn't get the dopamine affirmation that he very much desires. And so you've made a kid who will spiral upward because of what you've done. And so that's just a short analysis of how we've convinced ourselves that if you don't make your kids comfortable, it is only because you don't love them properly. And then teaching your kids that awkwardness is a discomfort that alerts you to the likelihood of a treasure. And I think that's what I want you to take away from this. Awkwardness alerts you to the statistical likelihood of achieving a treasure. That's a good bet, right? Awkward is a good bet because awkward already, the forces that you had nothing to do with, classified it as not danger. And since it's not danger, that means that bit of chaos is unexplored territory. That unmapped part of the world is where something exists that you don't have to fight for. My son had out an old copy of Age of Empires. I think that was it. And it's all dark outside where you have somebody. And then you send someone and it becomes explored territory. And there are things in the explored territory. In the unexplored territory, there might be a gold mine just waiting for you. But the thing is, if you only stay in the explored territory, then the only way you can get treasure is by fighting for it. And so that's what awkwardness is. Awkwardness is a map that says it could be. Okay? If you're fragile, awkwardness says run away, because this is a bit of chaos. But awkwardness specifically maps a statistically good bet. Awkward says there isn't a dragon, there's something else. And that something else is evidence of a bit of mismatch with the social map. That means there's unexplored territory right at hand. And that unexplored territory right available to you. You have some unexplored territory that you can make the most of. And that is, I would say, pretty amazing. So that's my takeaway. And like I said, it's my takeaway that sort of justifies what I already do. And that's not necessary. But it's my gift to you that says, all right, here's the analysis that hopefully helps you understand what you're looking at. I get that treasure because I'm talented in that front. But it's a skill that may be worth achieving. Maybe you need to begin to play out your last awkward. Here would be the practical thing. I don't know if this works or not, right? Because I do it effortlessly. But the thing which you might want to do is to think back on your last awkward situation where you ran away. And think about it in terms of, basically a mismap. I think about watching my navigator and all of a sudden there's a detour. And you're like, high anxiety. I can't take the road that my navigator told me to take. And you say, yeah, but this is a matter of an inconvenience. This is not danger. Okay? So that's what you're going to tell yourself. You're going to say, hey, that last awkward situation was I mapped a social action, and I found out that my map was inadequate, which means there's a bit of non-dangerous, unexplored territory which might have a treasure. But because my emotions mapped it as a awkward situation, I have pretty good evidence that it's not danger. And since it's not danger, then searching the unexplored territory for treasure is not a certain outcome, but it's a safe undertaking. Now, that might change 5 minutes from now. Maybe awkward turns into dangerous and I need to back away. But I would trust the right hemisphere. It takes into account so many things. It probably accurately identified awkward. And so, statistically, it's a good bet. Is it necessary? No. I don't know. But it's statistically a good bet. That's what I want you to think about. Think about your last awkward situation. Follow it through to the best of your ability and try to at least come up with how could I confirm or deny Jeremy's hypothesis that this was a good bet. And that'll give you something to think about while you go mushroom picking or whatever's on your agenda for today. So the end of my podcast, and it would be really cool if we found one more here just to say goodbye to, but I appear to be moving past. No, one more. No, I got whatchamacallit, gorse bushes. No, gooseberry bushes. Nope, I'm going to have to say goodbye without showing you one more. But here's a look around the beautiful woods. Happy trails.